Matt Canavan is a national senator for Queensland. Thanks for your time this afternoon. We've long heard about the potential in Northern Australia. Various governments have said we can do more with the North. What is the key that is going to unlock that potential?
Well, I think one thing, Spearsy, actually up front is it's not just the money that the government is putting forward here today. As you say, other governments have tried to do that, and there is a substantial amount of funding put forward by the government. But it's also the changes, particularly to land tenure. What has held Northern Australia back in particular over the years is a lack of property rights. Many of the leases are pastoral leases. They don't have full freehold property rights, and that restricts the ability of landowners to fully develop their property. We're putting money aside to try and make sure we finalise Indigenous land and native title claims over the next 10 years, and I think that will be a great spur to the north if we can achieve that.
What's the practical difference that's going to make? Because this is a really interesting part of what's being announced today. What sort of industry projects are going to flow from what you're doing here for this Indigenous land?
Well, I'll give you one example. There's proposals to develop a cotton industry on the Flinders River. The CSIRO last year identified that this is a possibility. There's the water available, there's the sun there, the soils are just as good as those in southern Queensland and northern New South Wales. However, at the moment, the property rights that landowners have in that region restrict them from developing irrigation proposals. They need to sign agreements with native title claim holders before they can, and that's fair enough. But the money we're putting aside will help develop the legal and anthropological data you need to finalise those agreements and make sure we can get these things going. And while Queensland may have lost the state of origin last night, I think we've won today with this package because it's a great news for Queensland and particularly North Queensland. Yeah,
I like that. I like that. Now let me ask you about the visa changes here too, because more flexibility around temporary workers, in particular, or those on working holiday visas. What, they get an extra year to work in Australia if they're working in the north?
Yeah, look, at the moment, right around the country, backpackers and people on holiday visas can earn an extra 6 months if they work in particular industries and particularly remote locations, and this is just an expansion of that scheme to focus on the agriculture and tourism industries in particular, and in the north as well.
All right, so what sort of jobs largely are we talking about in the north that those on working holiday visas generally take up?
Well, in the areas that I'm familiar with and go around, there's lots of people that work in our agricultural sector, either in horticulture and picking fruit, etc., or in helping in a stock camp as well. Increasingly more overseas people are doing that, and in the tourism sector there is an enormous number of jobs that go unfilled in that sector at the moment. And look, this is not just about workers from overseas. I'm hoping that more Australians as well will seek to move north. In some respects, we're creating a reverse Brisbane line here. People will want to be above the Tropic of Capricorn in the future, in my view, and it's a great life up there. I live north of that line. It's a fantastic lifestyle, and I'd encourage more Australians to not go west, but to move north.
It certainly is a beautiful part of the world. Now, let me ask you about water, because I heard some very interesting statistics from Andrew Robb this afternoon in announcing all of this. 60%, I think it was, of Australia's rainfall is in Northern Australia, but only 2% of that is actually captured. So much of it is lost. If we could capture 5% of that water, we would be unlocking a huge amount of arable land. Now, there is money here to do some of that, to try and capture some of that water through new dam projects, water infrastructure. How likely is it that we are going to see a big difference here?
Look, I think there's a new dawn for irrigated agriculture in the north. We're on the cusp of something. Obviously, it depends on being able to sell agricultural products at a good price, and we're lucky enough at the moment to have record beef prices, good cotton prices, record sheep meat prices, and not too bad grain prices as well. So the climate is right for investment in the north. The demand is coming and continuing to grow from Asia. There is, though, at times, a need for governments to provide some assistance early on, particularly to large-scale dam projects. There's also the need for governments to provide the certainty for private investors to take the risk and develop their own storages. And I think there's great potential for that on the Flinders River, on the Gilbert River. These are areas that are very unpopulated, that have low socioeconomic advantages, and if we can develop these new areas, it's a new frontier for our nation. It'll bring more prosperity, particularly to our Indigenous Australians, and it'll bring greater prosperity to our whole country.
Now, look, all of this sounds good, but when we're talking about taxpayers' money in particular, we obviously need to be very careful about how it's spent. There's one element that I'm curious about. This is the $5 billion Northern Australia Fund that was announced in the budget. We still don't know a lot about how this is going to work. It's meant to be providing concessional loans to the private sector to fast-track major projects in the north. Now, if they're projects that can't get funding from a bank, why should the taxpayer be backing it?
Well, I believe, Spearsy, this is just another example of us willing to back people who are willing to have a go. You're right that the guidelines haven't been developed yet, but I would expect, we'd be expecting the private sector to take a substantial risk themselves. A lot of this finance would be about bridging, getting people over a risky period of an investment cycle and helping to provide some initial capital for this to occur. This happens all across the world and quite successfully. The Europeans have a European Infrastructure Bank which works quite well. In the United States, municipal bonds have tax-free exempt status. I think this is a great initiative that can leverage. But here's the thing, when Labor put forward a similar
style bank, if you like, for the environment, it was ridiculed by the coalition as the Bob Brown's bank, where it's, you know, again, trying to fund projects, help projects along that may not be viable for a commercial bank to fund.
Well, those projects weren't about building a new area of our country and a risky area of our nation. Those projects were about supplying more energy into a market in Australia which is already oversupplied with electricity, and that's causing enormous difficulties, particularly in parts of regional Queensland that previously relied on coal mining and coal power stations. This proposal is taking the clear advantages that Northern Australia demonstrate and are apparent, and providing a small amount of government funding to help get these things off the ground.
All right, so overall with this package, how are we going to measure its success? Is it going to take a decade, or will we be able to measure something before then as to whether this has actually worked?
Well, this is a plan for 5, 10 and 20 years. It is a plan that will take time. Look, how do you measure success? Well, I do want to see more Australians move to the north. We have, I think one of the issues in this country is that 60% of our people live in our top 5 cities. And when you compare that to the US, their top 5 cities account for less than 15%, depending on how you measure it, but maybe as less as 5%. And I think that's far too concentrated. Too many people live in a small crescent in the southeast of our nation, and I also think this is related to the housing affordability issues. I will measure success by more people moving to the north and creating a more efficient spread of people across our nation.
Let me move away from Northern Australia, just get your thoughts on the big story of the day in Canberra. The Prime Minister suggesting Labor is rolling out the red carpet for terrorists. Do you agree?
Well, I'm very concerned about the comments of the Shadow Attorney General, I believe this morning on Sky News, on your fantastic television channel, Spearsy. Apparently he was asked how are you going to, how would you propose for terrorists to be, or alleged terrorists to be tried in court before they had their citizenship revoked. And his answer was clear in black and white: you bring them back here. Now, I think that is an unbelievable suggestion to be made by a Shadow Attorney General, that you would somehow countenance the invitation back to people that have been fighting in terrorist armies. And I fully back the Prime Minister here.
Isn't that exactly what we're doing, though, with anyone who's not a dual national? The majority of those who are over there?
Well, we can't. We've got more complicated issues with them, Spearsy. We've got to tailor our response to the relevant situation in each individual case. And obviously, the government's having a discussion about those that may not be dual nationals but have possibly a possibility of getting citizenship elsewhere. But Other countries have implemented the situation where we'd strip someone with dual nationality.
Sure,
if
but the point here I'm making
here
isn't this an area that is nuanced, as you explained there? Why is it rolling out the red carpet to stick with what we're currently doing?
I don't believe it's nuanced in the case where someone is a dual citizen. Other countries have done this. Parliamentary committee reports have recommended it. And it's clear, in my view, that this is the right decision. The Cabinet has made a decision. The party room has backed that decision. It's unclear what the Labor Party's position is.
So under the current laws we have in place today, is the red carpet rolled out right now for terrorists?
It is not, but what I'm fearing is that the Labor Party seem to be countenancing, if not rolling out the red carpet, at least getting it ready to do so.
I don't see how.
Well, I can't believe that a shadow Attorney General would suggest that we bring back the people who are fighting overseas when we clearly don't have to do that, when they clearly have other options to live in another country, given they are dual citizens. Why you would even consider that is remarkable to me.
To prosecute and jail them,
should be corrected.
As the Prime Minister said today, it's exactly what he wants to do for those who aren't dual nationals. He wants to lock them up here.
Well, we don't have that option with those people. I mean, we can only do what we have an option to do. Clearly, in the case of dual nationals, we can do that.
But surely it's not rolling out the red carpet then. If it's still going to be the case for those who aren't dual nationals, that we want to bring them back and lock them up here, is that a red carpet for them?
Well, look, I mean, choose your own analogy and metaphor, Spearsy. It doesn't really animate me too much how it's described. I just want to get the right outcome that keeps Australians safe, and I don't think that outcome is to permit those that have been engaged in these activities to come back to Australia when clearly they have another country to go to.
All right, Nationals Senator Matt Canavan, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon.